One day after President Obama dismissed Donald Trump's chances at becoming president, the billionaire is firing back. Trump tweeted today, "Interesting how President Obama so haltingly said, 'I would never be president.'" This from perhaps the worst president in U.S. history. And with 3 days until the South Carolina primary, many are wondering how the president's words will affect the race.
Joining us from Washington are Josh Holmes and Heidi Przybyla. Josh is a Republican strategist and former chief of staff to Mitch McConnell, and Heidi is a senior political reporter for USA Today. Josh, let me start with you first. Good to see you. Many Republicans disagree with President Obama's politics. Will the president's statement fuel the fire that Donald Trump has already tapped into with voters, that they are angry, that they're upset, that they feel that their piece of the American pie has diminished, and the president is not responding to that?
Yeah, let me start by paraphrasing Marco Rubio. Let us dispel of the notion that the president doesn't know exactly what he's doing. He knows exactly what he's doing. He can read polls as well as anybody else, and he can see that Donald Trump is basically the only Republican candidate in the field that doesn't have a substantial lead on Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders at this stage in the game. He's absolutely Barack Obama and the Democrats' best chance at holding the White House. And so elevating him from the podium, really, there's nothing he can do that's more helpful to Donald Trump with Republican primary voters.
So, Heidi, basically to that same point, is this a bit of reverse psychology on the president's part? Are Democrats hoping that he'll actually become the nominee in the hopes that, maybe Sanders or Clinton will beat him? Certainly, I think the most recent polls, which aren't too recent, indicate that they would beat him.
Well, it always seemed like a dream for the Democrats, looking at those poll numbers that Josh just cited, which are enduring, that Donald Trump would actually have a shot at the nomination. But guess what? It looks like now he has actually a pretty good shot at the nomination. And yes, it's not just the poll numbers, but it's what's going on within the in terms of Democrats, but it's what's going on in the Republican Party. Because now what you're seeing in South Carolina and other states is while Donald Trump has a very strong base of support within the party, he's also the most polarizing. So what the Democrats are looking at those numbers and saying, gee, if we got into a general election context, not only would he fire up our base, but we could pull from some of theirs. We could pull some of these moderate Democrats playing back some of this demagogic language that he's used on immigration, some of the comments that he's used on women, Muslims, just kind of runs the gamut. So like Josh said, yes, it's very strategic. But let me say that there's also, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the personal side of this as well, which is that, Donald Trump and Barack Obama go way back. Donald Trump was almost single-handedly initially behind a lot of these birther rumors about the president. And more recently, I heard him just last night on the radio fanning some of these crazy conspiracy theories about foul play in the death of Justice Antonin Scalia.
Yeah, well, we know that Mr. Trump will say whatever sort of comes to mind. And generally, many of us here who are reporters, or those of you who follow Washington very, very well, know that every time we say this might be the thing that sinks him, usually it's what actually causes a surge.
A boost, yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. Josh, let me ask you, in South Carolina, it looks like this is Trump's race to lose. The other candidates are polling way behind him. What can he, or what can they do, I should say, to gain some more traction? I'm specifically interested in what your thoughts are on Jeb Bush, who's been on the offensive a little bit more than he had been earlier.
Yeah, well, I think that South Carolina is a really important state for Jeb Bush. We saw his brother, the president, come in just this week and have a huge rally. Governor Bush looked like he had more energy and has been really attacking the ground in a big way in South Carolina. He needs to post a solid result. I think the issue is Donald Trump has got a commanding lead at this point, and nobody's going to catch him until that field winnows further. It's part of the reason you hear all the other candidates talk about how this is going to be a long process. And the reality is that Marco Rubio, Governor Kasich, Governor Bush, the share of the electorate that they make up right now, actually, if put into one, is pretty competitive with where Donald Trump is right now. The problem is it's not put into one, it's put across three, and then you add Ted Cruz to it, who's got sort of a different base in there as well. And it's not going to be until there's some more consolidation after South Carolina, perhaps after Nevada, when we get into the SEC primary, and then really look for the mid-March states, those big winner-take-all states, as maybe the first time that there's another candidate that can sincerely compete with Donald Trump for the nomination here.
So Josh, when you hear the candidates saying that this is going to be a long process, the idea that a lot of people have is, look, how long can they last? I mean, we still see Ben Carson in there. How are they raising money? How are they able to go beyond South Carolina, looking ahead to the upcoming Republican election schedule?
Well, this is a big test, right? I mean, it's going to be very difficult for these candidates if they do not perform well in South Carolina, meaning they don't outperform some kind of expectation and at least look like they've got a growing base of support to justify to donors to go back and reinvest in their campaign again. This is where the rubber meets the road. It is going to be very difficult to fund these bigger states because, remember, the other piece of the puzzle here is Iowa and New Hampshire are very retail politic focused. You can make up a lot of ground just simply by being there, knocking on doors, sitting in diners and talking to folks. When we're talking about South Carolina, and even more important when we go through the South, we're talking about heavy advertising states, and those are expensive, and it takes real dollars to do that. And the question is, which one of these candidates is going to have the resources available? All of them will not.
So let's talk about the Democratic race now. Heidi, they're 3 days away from the Nevada caucuses. Right now, Sanders and Clinton, they're in a dead heat there. Recently, the Clinton campaign has tried to downplay expectations in some creative ways, using some creative logic, I think. But what do you think the deciding factor will be in that race?
Well, right now, like you said, this is, I think, really scary for the Clinton team just because there's so many reminders of what happened in Iowa. And yet, unlike Iowa, this is a state that is exactly what they said would carry them, which is it's a state that looks more like the general electorate, you know, with minority voters. About 30% of the voters there are expected to be minority voters. So if these poll numbers hold up and we see Bernie Sanders capable of doing what he did in Iowa, which is to kind of pull in all of this last minute grassroots support and basically comes right up on her heels or even beats her in Nevada, then it kind of tears apart that whole argument that the Clinton team has been making, which is that once we get past these majority white states, you know, we will prevail, and Bernie Sanders is basically just an older white candidate who appeals just to the far left of the party. So I think that's, you know, what you're seeing there. And the Clinton team from the beginning, I think, was looking at these numbers after New Hampshire and started to downplay Nevada. But the problem is that even in places like South Carolina, where that's, you know, considered part of their firewall, if they win, if Bernie Sanders wins or even just comes close to winning in Nevada, that could give him a critical bump up in some of those southern states, and that would, you know, unfortunately for the Clinton team, potentially also carry over into some of the bigger states, which I think is their real concern right now. When you see places like Michigan with Bernie Sanders the other night with a jaw-dropping, you know, 9,000 people turning out there right in Hillary Clinton's backyard, where she wanted to kind of make a statement there, have a debate in Flint, and claim some of these larger delegate-rich states. So it's really just all about the momentum. And I think many watchers were not looking at Nevada as kind of this watershed, but that's what it's shaping up to be.
Yeah, this entire election, Heidi, is shaping up to be one of the most fascinating. I've said it a million times. I'll say it one more time. Just one of the most interesting ones on record. Josh Holmes and Heidi Przybyla, thank you both so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.